Hi, good morning, everybody. I think I've met most of you, but I'm Martha Broad. I'm the Executive Director of the MITEI Energy Initiative, or MITEI, as we call ourselves. And I just want to say I'm really excited about the day ahead. We had a wonderful day yesterday. I got a lot of great feedback from people. And I just want to share one example of how this is an amazing and growing network. I happened to yesterday run into and just walk for a couple minutes with Caroline Golan, who won the poster award last year, and mentioned to me how that had been so important to her, both from a prestige and a little bit of funding standpoint. She actually was able to create an organization that is a consulting firm based on her analytical model around energy, and she has clients such as the Natural Resources Defense Council, et cetera. So she's rolling, and it was really heartening to hear that story. I was so impressed and heartened that C3E is really creating tangible progress in many, many ways. So again, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, who hopefully we will get their slide, if we haven't already, up behind me with logos. We have 14 of them, who I acknowledged yesterday, and please continue to thank them as you run into them. Additionally, the DOE and MITEI Energy Initiative staff, who have been incredibly helpful and have worked tirelessly for months to bring this together. So I'm just gonna briefly highlight what we're gonna be up to today. And we're gonna start off with a great keynote from Melanie Kenderdine of DOE. Melanie is the counselor to Secretary Ernie Moniz, and also the director of the Energy Policy and Systems Analysis group there. And she'll be talking to us. I'll give you a little more info as I get back to that. She'll be up next. We're going to do the poster awards later today. So don't forget to fill out your ballot for the grad students who are coming from all over the US to share their research. In addition, we have actually broadened the lightning presentations, which is our undergrads. We've reached out nationally this year, which has been very exciting. And our Director of Education, who has now gone on to even better things within MIT, was credited with that idea, and our staff really put to work to get a lot of wonderful people in. Lightning presentations, for those of you who don't know, are going to be undergrads who will come up and spend about 3 to 5 minutes giving you insight into their research. I was able to have dinner with one last night, and I know she's going to tell us all sorts of interesting things about ocean engineering. So we have a couple of panels. One is the transition to a low-carbon future. Clearly, with COP21 right around the corner, we're going to want to take a look at how investment strategies and actions can actually move nations forward to address climate. We're going to also have a wonderful panel on technology innovation. We're going to hear from researchers and entrepreneurs, and some of them are the same with spin-out companies from their labs, about clean energy technologies and hear their stories. Also take a look at getting those technologies out of the lab and into the market, and how can we speed up that pace for energy technologies, which is clearly needed if we're going to address climate successfully. All right, now, so without further ado, I want to introduce Melanie Kenderdine, who was the executive director of the MITEI Energy Initiative prior to me, and has been a real example for all of us women on how to lead and manage effectively. She helped conceptualize C3E from the very beginning and has been key to the partnership that we've continued between MIT and DOE to host this symposium and awards. She's going to share some key findings of a recently released report, the Quadrennial Energy Review, which was actually mentioned on the Jon Stewart show by Secretary Moniz not so long ago. I was pleased to see that. Melanie led the team that produced this report and is focusing on giving recommendations to policymakers, industry, investors around modernizing our energy infrastructure. So Melanie, welcome, and please join me. All right.
Thank you very much, Martha. And let me say, I came up last night. I commuted up here from Washington to Cambridge every week for 6.5 years. And when we stood up the Energy Initiative, and I never moved. My husband lived in DC at the time. My son did as well. He ended up coming up to MIT. And so for my last 3 years up here, my son was here as well. And I have to tell you, when I came in last night, I had no idea where I was. I can't tell, this place has changed amazingly. My restaurant was on the street that I walked down. I ultimately bought a condo, but I walked down the street. I walked down that street for 4 years. I had no idea where I was, where the restaurant was. Incredible progress, I think, and I think it says a lot about MIT as an engine of innovation. And I'm going to, we always, when we were working at putting together the symposium and working with Caroline McGregor and her team at DOE, I was at MIT at the time. There was always kind of push and pull as to whether the symposium was about women or whether it was about substantive issues. And I'm going to talk a little bit about both because I think it's important. I spent a lot of time at the department mentoring young women, and had one of my mentees in my office day before yesterday. And so I think it's really important. I'm totally committed to this. And anyone, and I would also like to give a call out to some of my mentees who are now working at EPSA, many of them sitting at this table back here. If you work in EPSA or work at DOE, let's give you applause because it's a really intense time for us. This group is known in DOE as the MIT Mafia in my office, but we have some incredible young women and young men from MIT. But I think back on my career in energy and wanted to highlight a few things that I've been part of and that matter most to me personally. Big one, naval oil shale reserves. The naval oil shale reserve in Utah was taken from the Ute Indians in 1916 to provide oil for the Navy in World War I. And I helped engineer a return of that oil shale reserve to the Ute Indians. It was the largest land transfer back to the Native Americans in the lower 48 in 150 years. Those are the kinds of things that are really important to me. I helped then Professor Moniz and Bob Armstrong stand up the MIT Energy Initiative. I worked with Secretary Moniz on the Iran agreement this summer. I've been doing this for 40 years, and that was the most intense period of my professional life and extremely rewarding. And helped stand up my office at DOE now, the Energy Policy and Systems Analysis. But finally, and there is a punchline here, starting this event here in 2012. This symposium and working with the groups of women that we have worked with over the years has been one of the most rewarding experiences that I've ever had. And I really appreciate that this is still moving forward, and there are such stellar people represented here today. Lara Pierpoint and I sat in the offices and dreamt up the cash awards. We thought that mid-career women were where we needed to focus our attention. And so dreamt up the cash awards and then the poster session. And we hope to have something really spectacular next year, which will be the 5th anniversary of C3E, the 4th anniversary of this symposium. But I do consider this one of the most rewarding things that I've done, and I look forward to continuing to work with you all. I've had to recuse myself from activities It's Marianne Sullivan's in the audience. She was the former general counsel she didn't tell me to do it. This general counsel told me to do it. I had to recuse myself when I went back into the government from working on things at MIT and this in particular for 2 years, and I am out from under my recusal and got up here pretty quickly. So I'm going to start on the quadrennial energy review. I'm going to start with a few key drivers and challenges. I run the policy office in addition to being the energy counselor to the secretary. When Marianne and I worked at the Department of Energy, I was the energy, not counselor, senior advisor to the secretary and ran the policy office. So I haven't made a lot of progress in my career in 15 years, but I do spend a lot of time and have over the course of many years thinking about the challenges, drivers, et cetera, for developing policy. So I thought I'd go through a few of those. This is actually an MIT slide. And Professor Ron Prinn developed roulette wheels to demonstrate to the press the urgency of climate change and how policy interventions could make a difference. And we actually did actual roulette wheels, and delivered them to Prince Albert in Monaco when we went over and talked to Prince Albert and had a conference in Monaco. One of the most incredible events I've ever been to in my life. And for very strange reasons. But what this says is this is a median probability of surface warming of 5.2 degrees Celsius by 2100, and a 90% probability of 3.5 to 7.4 degrees warming by 2100. When you tell climate scientists 7 degrees Celsius warming, their faces go white, because that is shall we say, transformational for the planet. But with some mild policy interventions, you can hold it to the 2 to 3 degree range. That's what we are working on right now, going into COP21 in Paris, and working on a set of policies and interventions that might help us meet the 2 to 3 degree range target, which still causes substantial issues on the planet. I'll talk a little bit more about them. Everyone's seen the Sankey diagram. These are energy flows. This is for 2030. And it's EAA numbers, and Livermore Labs did this. 680 quads a year is the forecast. Almost half of that right there is wasted energy. So I know a lot of you people I talked to at dinner last night are spending their time worrying about wasted energy, as they should. And we need to dramatically reduce the size of that bar. Over here, those are the end uses over on that side. Over here are your fuels. Those little tiny strings are your renewables. And these are 2030 forecasts. And these are your conventional fuels down here, those big bars. And so the challenge is, in very short order, in order to meet that 2 to 3 degree target, transform the little tiny strings into great big ones and save a lot of that wasted energy. And so I spend a lot of my time worrying about that. This is annual per capita electricity consumption. On the x-axis is electricity consumption, and on Y is a human development index around the world. And there is a direct correlation between electricity consumption and your position on the Human Development Index. I worry a lot about energy equity. It creates another tension as you are trying to reduce carbon emissions. What you're seeing coming up here are groups of countries. US and Canada are very, very high on the HDI, but they are also, we're energy hogs. A group of European countries do better than we do. And then you start falling down on the Human Development Index. And then you have countries where we need to do a lot of work and serious energy equity issues. We have to figure out, quite frankly, in many of those countries, how to use conventional energy without exacerbating climate change. It's an enormous challenge. And this is just a factoid. The world would need to consume 4 times as much energy by 2100 to raise the standards of living in developing nations to those in the developed nations. And so that is another measure of the challenge. These are renewable capacity additions. They have been material recently, but electricity demand is flat or declining. So you're trying to shoehorn renewables into a system that is not demanding it. And you look at the largest graph down there, that's solar panels. I can't see, it's PV, yeah, it's PV, 2008 to 2012, and that line is the increase in deployment, and the graph is, the bars are the costs coming down, but still, even then, 96% of our fuel is not solar and not wind, and that's another measure of the challenge. Changes in precipitation. This is percentage changes in the 21st century, and the dark red is loss of precipitation. Blue is where you're going to see more precipitation under climate change. And I'm from the southwestern United States. It doesn't look very good there. But another area that's in the news a lot lately is the Mediterranean Ring. And that is where we have enormous refugee problems, a lot of energy production, and a lot of instability. And this is a threat multiplier here when you see the loss of water. I'm sure some of you read the story the other day that it is going to be too hot in some Middle Eastern countries to sustain life, just heat. And so another big issue. Life cycle water consumption for electricity production. And this here, that is combined cycle gas turbines with shale gas. A lot of discussion about how much water is consumed in shale gas production. The blue is, the green on the top is with CCS. And so you go across the technologies there. Those are coal steam turbines. That's nuclear. And this is concentrating solar. So we are looking at the previous slide, when you loss of precipitation, these kinds of issues start playing into your equation. And where you want your solar, you're using a lot of water. And places where there's a lot of sun, there could be not a lot of water. A lot of people who say that reducing greenhouse gas emissions hurts GDP. That is not the case. And these are the light green is GDP growth, and the dark green is percent change in greenhouse gas emissions. You look over here, and you can see in 2011, I need to update these numbers, 2011, 2012, our greenhouse gas emissions went way down, and our GDP growth went up. You only see the bars down below. You saw a lot of greenhouse gas emissions reduction when we had problems with the economy, but I don't know what happened in 2006. That was the Bush administration, and where you do see a slight decline in greenhouse gas emissions. But EIA says the increase in natural gas-fired power generation is largely responsible for this. We are switching from coal to gas. I'll talk about that in a minute. There was an increase in wind generation, but hydro declined more than wind increased during that period of time. So you can't, it is attributed to that, and the carbon intensity of power generation fell by 3.5% in that period. One other thing, land use by intensity, and this is square kilometers per terawatt hour per year. And I'm just looking here at the electricity generation technologies. Nuclear is by far the lowest, and you can see how they stack up. But this is another issue we're looking at. We look at these kinds of things in the Quadrennial Energy Review, and it becomes important when you're talking about distributed generation, large wind farms, large PV farms, et cetera, et cetera. This has been a huge change in the United States in the last 15 years. This is shale gas production as a percent of total gas production. and it was fundamentally zero in 2000. You get over here to 2014, and it is 50% of our natural gas production. It is a sea change in a 15-year period of time where we were going to be importing all of our natural gas, and instead we are now starting exports probably in January of next year. Major change. Something I want you all to consider as we think about innovation. This actually is from the MIT Future of Natural Gas study. A lot of people thought, and the industry takes credit for a shale gas revolution that took place very rapidly. That wasn't the case. The Department of Energy, that purple there is federal funding. And that was right at the start of the Department of Energy. The DOE invested in shale basin characterization and in technologies that we now use today, horizontal drilling, certain types of drill bits that you use in shale gas production. That green is the Gas Research Institute. That is a source of funding that disappeared when we deregulated the gas industry. A lot of R&D had suffered under deregulation. This is one of them, but it had a steady source of funds over 16 years, and there was a time-limited tax credit. You saw the previous slide showing you the difference. That kind of sustained investment is needed to change an energy space. Another huge change since I was at the department before is how much oil we're producing and where the location of that oil is being produced. And this is a map of infrastructure to give you some idea. The red arrows there are new pipeline additions. And the other arrows are existing, the green are existing. And so where we historically moved oil from the Gulf of Mexico up to Midwestern refineries, so we were going from south to north, we are now going from north to south. That has some energy security implications I'll tell you about in a minute that we looked at in the Quadrennial Energy Review. President Obama actually, and it was at Secretary Moniz, when he was on the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, recommended that we do a Quadrennial Energy Review. When he became secretary, he went to the president. The president liked the idea. So President Obama instructed the government to do a quadrennial energy review in January 2014. I had just stood up my office, so we've been working really hard since then. My office does the analysis and recommendations, coordinates all this. We had to deal with 22 agencies of the federal government. That's where all the equities in energy across the federal government. That was an interesting interagency coordination process when you had to adjudicate at the end 1,500 comments from different federal agencies. But that's what you have to do in order to come out with a policy. The QER is supposed to be an integrated view of energy, an outline of legislative proposals, executive actions, resource requirements for research, a strong analytical basis for decision making. That's what we provided. And our first year focus, we redefined quadrennial. It's not one every 4 years. We are doing 4 installments. The secretary was very firm in his belief that doing large, comprehensive energy plans it's such a huge part of our economy that they do not provide you with actionable recommendations. And so we have divided up the QER into 4 installments. The first one was transmission, storage, and distribution infrastructure. And I got a lot of questions and some complaints in the beginning. Why are you starting in the middle? Okay, but what I would say is that you can see from the previous information, we need some radical transformation of our energy systems, and the limiting factor is capital-intensive, long-lived infrastructure. These infrastructures last 30, 40, 50 years. We are retiring coal plants that are 70 and 80 years old right now. And so if we don't have a good handle on where we're going with infrastructure, we are going to either lock ourselves into certain things over the next 30 years, or we are going to strand a lot of assets. And I can tell you, I'm sure the industry players here know how much they fight stranding assets. And so we started in the middle for those reasons, and quite frankly, infrastructure is less partisan than other issues that in the world of Congress today. And we want to institutionalize the QER and make sure that it continues after we leave this administration, and demonstrating, one, that we were analytical, unbiased, et cetera, and two, focusing on things that are supportable across the board, I think was very important for institutionalizing the QER. This is, we call this our flower diagram. We started out looking at conventional infrastructures, natural gas, liquid fuels, and electricity. We ended up, after the analysis, looking at a very different structure. And organize it that way, increasing the resilience, reliability, safety, and asset security of these infrastructures. That takes you into cybersecurity, physical security, but resilience to climate change, adaptation, et cetera, et cetera. The one system that we actually looked at, the actual physical system as opposed to gas and liquid fuels, was electricity, because everything else relies on electricity. So it is probably the most important infrastructure that we have for energy today. Modernizing our energy security infrastructure, I'll talk about that briefly, and then improving shared transport infrastructures. This is not something that I anticipated I would have to know a lot about when I came back into the Department of Energy after being gone for 13 years, but I'll tell you how much I know about rail travel and rail energy movements by rail now, because we're moving a lot of energy by rail, and right down to knowing the names of certain types of rail cars. And let me say a few things about increasing the resilience, reliability, safety, and asset security of our TS&D infrastructures. This is a weird little slide. That dot there, yellow dot in the middle, that is Cushing, Oklahoma. 10% of our oil is stored at Cushing, Oklahoma at any point in time. It is a hugely important oil hub in the United States. Those lines are tornado paths. All of them, not just the three that it's pointing to, all of those blue lines are tornado paths around Cushing. We think that it is just, and severe storms are increasing. We think it is a matter of time, not if, but when Cushing experiences a major tornado. You need substantial hardening of these kinds of infrastructures, given what's going on with the climate. This is our pestilence slide, and that shows you where wildfires, earthquakes, tornadoes, and hurricanes predominate. The tornadoes, wildfires, and hurricanes are in part a result of the changing climate. Earthquakes are earthquakes, so we spent a lot of time focusing on what we might do to enhance the resilience of these infrastructures. This is another problem with infrastructure. We looked at storm surge and sea level rise, and these little dots are electricity substations, and that is the Gulf of Mexico. The green dots are substations that are currently vulnerable to storm surge and sea level rise. The yellow ones are, I think, a 2030 number. I can't see it from, I should have worn my glasses up here. The yellow dots are a 2030 number. And the size of the dot is related to the size of the substation. But what is really important in the Gulf of Mexico, over 50% of the U.S. refining capacity is in the Gulf of Mexico, and that refining capacity is now dependent on electricity. And when we had hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico, not only did you lose a lot of refined product in the southeast, because it's all going by pipeline to the southeast, we lost refinery capacity for several weeks because of the lack of electricity. And even now, the industry hardens, and a lot of the refineries have backup generation. They only have generation to keep those refineries from going into cold standby, not to run them. And so this storm surge, sea level rise, and storms creates a lot of problems, and certainly the human element, but it also creates significant issues for energy supply. Hold on. This is trends in, these are billion-dollar disaster events. These are all weather events. It's drought, flooding, freezing, severe storms, tropical cyclones, wildfires, and a winter storm. And what you saw was that you see over there on the far right, a lot of billion-dollar weather events in 2011, a lot of concern about that, but they did decrease. But one thing that didn't decrease, and it's actually increasing, is the yellow part of that bar, and those are severe storms. And I think we've seen evidence of this in the South, in Texas. Just last week, my son lives in Houston. He says it hasn't stopped raining since he moved there. He's been there for 6 months. He's seen 2 floods of Houston. And so that is a significant concern. I will tell you that there are federal laws for emergency response and replacement of these infrastructure that do not favor modernizing your infrastructure at the same time you are replacing it. The law right now, and it is called the Stafford Act, the law actually requires that you to replace your infrastructure as was. And so we considered recommending changing the law. We pulled our punches on that because it's complicated. And but we did make recommendations in the QER for pre-disaster hardening, where you could also modernize these infrastructures in anticipation of these kinds of disruptions, as well as replace them, as well as harden them. A couple other things here. We are looking in QER 1.2, we are looking at electricity soup to nuts. You see a bullet on here about cyber incidents and physical attacks increasing. I think that Ted Koppel has raised that issue a lot. He received a lot of press on that recently. I share Ted Koppel's concerns about our growing vulnerability to cyber attacks. We have very interconnected electricity grid and systems, and it is a growing concern and complicated problem, and the half of the cyber incidents reported to the Department of Homeland Security, over half, 54% in 2013 or 2014, were on energy installations. And so, and the next highest number was in single digits. So, so there are cyber attacks. At this point in time, they appear to be largely commercial, but I think that that's changing. And so another issue is high voltage transformers. There was an attack on the Metcalf transformer station in California. It was a well-planned and well-coordinated attack. They just didn't know when peak demand was. They took out, there was no ability to, they took out the internet communication system at that substation and shot up the substation and damaged it, but it was at a period of low demand. And so it didn't, you didn't see any kind of blackout. But those substations, those large transformers, are custom made. And they take 18 months to replace. And if you, and we don't really have a good supply chain in the United States. Most of them are manufactured outside of the United States. We looked at and made recommendations on establishing strategic transformer reserves in the QER, and I think something is passing the House yesterday on that. In the transportation bill. So that's another concern that we have. This is the importance of transmission infrastructure, gas transmission infrastructure, and New England and the Northeast suffers from not having a good gas transmission infrastructure. These are price differentials from Henry Hub, the main price point for U.S. gas. What you see here in the middle, there was a huge divergence in prices that attracted capital. and you got infrastructure build out there for natural gas pipelines, et cetera. And what you see is they came together over here in 2014. That shows you a build out of infrastructure. It came together everywhere except for the Northeast and Northeast and New England. And that's because the Northeast and New England is infrastructure constrained and needs the gas. And so it's just to illustrate for you how important this infrastructure is. This is another one. I didn't pick these specifically for Boston and New England, but this is important. The two little maps there, the left is Indianapolis and the right is Boston. And the yellow dots are modeled methane emissions from gas distribution systems. And you can see there that Boston has a lot of methane emissions from its existing gas distribution system. Indianapolis does not. But lest we think that Indianapolis is, that Boston is just laggards, what happened is there was an accident in Indianapolis in the 1980s, I believe. A gas distribution pipeline blew up, and they launched a significant gas pipeline replacement program. Massachusetts has done that within the last couple of years, and so Massachusetts is working on this. But it's a safety issue, it's a greenhouse gas emissions issue, and labor unions want to replace the pipes. The workers want to replace those pipes. And so I don't know the status of what's happening here in Boston, but you can see the impact of an expedited replacement program on those methane emissions. And you all might recall a couple of apartment buildings that got blown up in New York City. The gas main that blew up was 104 years old. And I thought that that this was only going to be about old cities in the Northeast. When you look at the cast and wrought iron pipelines, they're across the country: Michigan, Maryland, Missouri, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, and also states with bare steel are across the country as well. These are utility replacement programs. Some of them are as long as 90 years. And so we did in the QER recommend a program to buy down the cost for those least able to afford the rate shock associated with accelerated replacement of these pipes. Modernizing the electric grid. I already mentioned that, demand is flat or declining. That's the graph on the right. The graph in the upper left, I think that's maintenance. And so you can see the maintenance of the existing system going up. And then the bar charts in the lower left are the customer interruptions. And on the far left, the customer interruptions, the blue is weather, red is cyber, gray is physical, I can't read what it says, something physical. But then you look over on the right, the true interruptions at this point in time are all about weather. Okay, cyber is a growing concern. I think the gray is maintenance, and cyber is a growing concern. But right now we are not seeing it. We are theorizing about it. The good news: transmission. These are transmission investment drivers. These are from a survey of all the players in the industry. Reliability is obviously the number one concern, 48%. But renewables integration has moved up on everyone's radar screen for transmission investment. I would say a couple of things about that, and we spend a lot of time and will in the QER going forward, since we're doing electricity, that distributed generation and a demand response may, and coupled with renewable portfolio standards in states that favor indigenous generation, could reduce the need for long distance transmission. And in the end, you might get shorter long distance transmission because of a combination of policies. That's something that we'll be looking at in the next QER. I don't want to read the recommendations, but I just want to show you. This is federally regulated power lines, a map of them. These are NERC districts, and these are your RTOs. And the point that we make, and we didn't take this head on, although it is an impediment to technological change, is that electrons have nothing to do with jurisdictions. And the jurisdiction, and then you have state jurisdictions as well, all of the state PUCs. And it is extremely difficult with the current regulatory structure to take full advantage of a lot of the technologies that we have out there. You're starting to see a blurring of the lines between distribution and transmission. There are Supreme Court cases being considered on that right now. It is unclear who has authority. I don't think it's looking good for FERC at this point, but that was just listening to the oral arguments and questions. But we can't take full advantage of all of the technologies that we have, and we don't have good valuation of efficiency. Demand response. We don't have good valuation of baseload. There is huge value to baseload. That's those issues we're going to be looking at in the second QER, and do a little bit more on market structure and how it either is helping or impeding transformation of markets and utilities that are following a 100-year-old design with one-way flows. And that's not the technology that we have anymore, but it's tough to change. Let me go to energy security. This is actually a map from, two maps from the environmental impact statement for the Keystone Pipeline. I use it to illustrate a point I made to you earlier. The upper left-hand map, those little red dots are oil rail loading stations in 2010. There were 6 of them. This is 2013, only 3 years later. And not only can you see how much oil is moving by rail, you can't really see them. There are little red, little green triangles on there. That's oil moving by barge. Okay, but what you're also seeing is oil moving from north to south into the Gulf of Mexico. And that has congested the Gulf of Mexico, where our Strategic Petroleum Reserve shares the same, it shares commercial infrastructure. And that commercial infrastructure is incredibly congested. You see all of that's not just moving from the Bakken, it's moving from the Eagle Ford as well, moving into commercial facilities in the Gulf of Mexico. And so where the design drawdown capacity of our Strategic Petroleum Reserve is 4.4 million barrels a day, we think that our distribution capacity from the SPR, which is our main insurance policy in the event of an oil disruption, and I would point out that instability in the Middle East right now is not theoretical. There's a lot of instability in the Middle East, and so we started seeing this. We use the SPR in Libya. And what we started seeing is we could distribute SPR oil, but we were shutting in our own production. And so we have significant recommendations on how to increase the distribution capacity of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to affect and protect our economy, which is our obligation under law, is to protect the economy from harm in the event of a supply disruption. And I'm happy to say that in the budget agreement, we got $2 billion to help fix this problem. And so that's incredibly important for U.S. energy security. This is only marginally touched on in the QER, but I've spent an enormous amount of time working on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And what you see there in the lighter green, those are percentages of countries in Europe, percentage of their gas from Russia. And so you can see the extreme vulnerability of some of your Eastern European countries, all members of the EU, not Ukraine, but others, members of the EU. And the EU, those are our strongest allies. So we spent a great deal of time working on a broader and more collective definition of energy security. That's what you're seeing here. This is in the QER. We need flexible, transparent, competitive markets, diversified sources of fuels and routes, infrastructure modernization. We got, everyone was committed to climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions as an element of energy security. That is a big change. Energy efficiency as an element of energy security, and investment in R&D. And so this will be important. And I'll say something when I close, going into COP21. Then finally, this is shared infrastructure. As I mentioned, I never knew I would have to know so much about railroads from my experience at DOE before. This is another illustration of what you're seeing moving on rail. This is 2010. The green arrows are rail, oil moving by rail. This is 2011. This is 2012. This is 2013. This is 2014. That oil is moving on a fixed infrastructure, and a lot of it's it's coming from the upper Midwest. 70% of our ethanol moves on rail, and agriculture moves on rail, and coal moves on rail. So what you saw when all of this occurred was not only competition for rail space, and oil was the highest paying customer. You saw, so it drove up agricultural prices, and 4 small generating units, coal generating units in the upper Midwest shut down because they couldn't get their coal. So you started to see reliability problems with this as well. So we've looked at this quite a bit. This is a cartoon of ports and waterways. These are the ship channel operators, the Calcasieu Ship Channel, drew this cartoon. I would say that this is a pure federal responsibility. This is what happens when you put budget caps, artificial budget caps on things. The dredging of this channel is a pure federal responsibility. The left side is what it is supposed to be like, where 2 ships can pass. The right is what it has looked like at points in time. I think the Corps of Engineers has put a little more money into this since we raised this issue. But the LNG exports that I mentioned earlier, they're going to be moving in that same ship channel, and the ship channel operators call it self-dredging. And because we are not spending enough money on maintaining these channels. There is an interest in getting private investment to do it, but it's a federal responsibility. Until you change the law, no private investors are going to come in and do this, because it is the law and it is a federal responsibility. That's also the case for our locks and inland waterways. The U.S. has the largest inland waterway system in the world. A lot of those, that ethanol, coal, oil, et cetera, are also moving on barges on inland waterway systems. And the blue area there are delays that you see because of mechanical failures. Again, this is another pure federal responsibility. The Congress did put a little more money into this a little less than a year ago. But again, these are the things that get starved, infrastructure that gets starved. It has significant impacts on energy, but also a whole bunch of other commodities. And then finally, this is another shared infrastructure issue. This is the longest wind turbine in the world. It is, I think, 84 meters long. It is approaching the length of a football field. And this is in Europe. It's for an offshore wind farm. But wind turbines right now have to be in a single piece because they need to be in a single piece to withstand the pressure, the force. And we started laughing when we saw this. You can see what's happening to local roads. In the U.S., we import a lot of these. They've had to redesign ship hulls in order to transport these. 40% of the ones imported into the U.S. go through the Houston Ship Channel and then move up. A lot of wind generation in Texas, but they're moving up into the Wind Corridor too in the Midwest. And it's not only stressing the roads and highways and the local services. It's getting increasingly difficult to put them onto the towers because of how big they are. And so when we saw this, we called this too big to succeed. And so we were joking. We are totally dedicated to wind energy at the Department of Energy. It's an essential part of our future, but we need to start looking at things like this, supply chains, the implications of things other than greenhouse gas emissions. We just need to start looking at these systems. You have similar problems with those very large transformers that I talked about. That's when I discovered the name of a rail car. They're transported on schnabels. And that is the name of a rail car that they transport these very large transformers on, and there are a limited number of schnabels in the United States. And so moving large transformers around the country is an issue as well. But this is one of the things we looked at in shared transport that I never thought I would spend a lot of time thinking about or worrying about. Anyway, that's kind of a summary of things I consider hugely important, things that we did in the Quadrennial Energy Review. There were 63 recommendations in the QER. One of them we just got $2 billion for. That was a recommendation in the Quadrennial Energy Review. We have briefed 33 countries and the EU on the Quadrennial Energy Review. That has been largely at their request. They are, surprisingly enough, Raisa, one of my staff members back here, and I went to Bulgaria, and I thought that they would be interested in the results. They were interested in the process because everyone is a lot of countries and governments are interested in how we were able to take this and depoliticize this and do a lot of analysis and make recommendations based on analysis as opposed to politics. And a place like Bulgaria, where 100% of its gas is coming from Russia, they have huge interest in depoliticizing that and getting some diversity in their sources of natural gas. And so I think that it's had a significant impact. Senator Cantwell did a dramatic reading of the Quadrennial Energy Review on the Senate floor. There have been 2 hearings on it. It has been an incredible experience for me. I think it's highly impactful. I think we owe the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Moniz, an enormous debt of gratitude on this and all of the work that he's doing. We were doing this, and he was trying to negotiate with Iran as well. And we lost our secretary for 19 days. He was just gone over in Vienna negotiating on Iran. And so he is very dedicated to the QER, and we'll be doing another one here, and that should be due out in the fall. That's electricity, very complicated, and we're going to have to prioritize what we do in that. But I'd love to hear from all of you on that, and love to hear your questions. Thank you very much. Thank you. Marianne?
Melanie, how many of your 63 recommendations require federal appropriations in excess of $1 billion?
There are probably recommendations, I don't know, $10 to $12 billion total. over a 10-year period. The $2 billion for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is over a 10-year period. I'm sure you know that the House Energy Committee was marking up legislation, energy legislation. They had agreement with the Republicans and the Democrats on 3 of those mechanisms. It was about $5 billion. The pre-disaster hardening and innovation for the electric grid was one of them. The natural gas replacement, another one, and the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was another that they had. So they agreed on the QER recommendations. They didn't agree on other recommendations. So it's $10 to $12 billion, and going forward, we have 2 trips to Paris. There will be an IEA ministerial in Paris that I'll be at in a couple of weeks, actually less than that, and where the secretary is the chair of that. It's ministers, and he's the chair of that. And we are going to focus on innovation, and we are spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to get increases in funding for clean energy innovation in advance of the IEA ministerial and in advance of COP21. You know the problems with the budget caps, and it's an issue, but we can't change the trajectory of greenhouse gas emissions in time to avoid the 7 degrees unless we do something, unless we get a lot more serious about it. So, but it's $12 billion. So.
Hi, Melanie. This is Bobby Cates Garnick.
Hey, Bobby.
First of all, just to answer one of your questions on gas in Boston, to reassure people, we did have legislation passed 2 years ago to speed up the process of pipe replacement. Some of it had to do with the actual way that utilities recover their infrastructure costs. So if you see a lot of building around Boston infrastructure, Beacon Street, Boylston Street, that's a lot of the work that's being done. So I know you don't like the traffic, but there are good things happening. But I have 2 questions, and also from the state level, we really appreciate all of the interaction that the feds have given to the states. But can I ask you to do 2 other things? You talked a little bit about Iran and the role of the secretary. Can you just sort of explain a little more about the key role that he played? And also, could you talk a little bit about COP21?
I think that it was fairly unusual that you had 2 scientists, the Iranian energy minister and our energy minister there, negotiating on this agreement. But these are very, very technical issues, and I think in the end it was the focus on the specifics of the technical capabilities to both to monitor, to see if there's cheating, and all of the things that were attendant to that agreement, that you needed that significant technical input. And I think that it provided a lot of confidence with the members who had to make decisions on whether to support the agreement or not. And I think it was, I think that first it was to work to get a veto-proof majority, and then working to keep it from coming to the floor in the Senate because of the signal that might send to the rest of the world. It was P5+1. It was our closest allies working on this, and I think we're now sending a much more unified signal. But I think seeing a scientist engaged that deeply in that kind of a negotiation was necessary and an incredibly good thing. And COP21, what I would say is that the Chinese position, we spent a lot of time, some people in my office, State Department, White House, working on the Chinese commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. and it's tough to monitor these, and you know, a lot of countries are not, would not necessarily be transparent in how they're meeting their goals, but the Chinese commitment made it, I think it was just a sea change in how other countries viewed their role, and so that was very, very helpful. I would expect that you will see a big focus on innovation. I know that we care about it. That's what we're going to be doing in Paris at the ministerial, and we are showcasing clean energy technologies at the ambassador's residence, U.S. ambassador's residence in Paris, to showcase what we can do with clean energy innovation, and I expect you'll hear more about that going forward. I'm trying to get more money, always trying to get more money domestically. That's an international effort, but my focus is on domestic. So, hey, Marilyn, how are you?
That was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I hope you'll make it available to us so we
Sure.
can share with our colleagues and our students at other universities, like Georgia Tech.
Great, sure.
One of the topics, I was glad that you talked about issues of equity.
Right.
And the one slide you had talking about if we raise the rest of the world up to our standards, we'll multiply energy consumption by fourfold or something like that. I always have trouble. I stumble over that issue all the time. How do we pull 1 billion people out of poverty without burning up the climate?
Right.
And have you thought about various kind of global scenarios where you decarbonize and you still allow energy services, moving to the concept of energy services rather than energy consumption, and sort of show how it could be done at a big scale without the fourfold increase in greenhouse gas emissions?
I haven't taken on the world yet, okay, but although I have spent a lot of time on the G7, Ukraine, et cetera, but in one respect, in a couple of respects, some countries that don't have the kind of infrastructure that we have have more opportunities to do it better than we do it. As I said, we have a grid and utilities in place that are operating under a 100-year-old paradigm, and significant investment in that infrastructure. That's very tough to change. And I think in countries in Africa where you don't have a central grid, and you know, you can see it with cell phones. Nobody has a landline anymore except for me, you know, but it's the same thing with energy, that greater opportunities for distributed generation. I know a lot of several of the award winners here in the past have spent a lot of time. It doesn't take a lot of electricity in some of these places to make huge differences in people's lives, but I do think we have an opportunity for different configurations in parts of the world that don't have grids like we do, and opportunities to use cleaner energy that was distributed generation, could be diesel as well, but hopefully what we're doing here with solar panels, what they've done in Germany, the lower cost will help in the developing world as well, and but we're not going to be looking at that. Others are going to have, other offices will do that. So we have international. So it's Caroline's job. Yeah.
Maya Wessels with First Solar. Thank you very much for your comments. That was an incredibly impressive presentation.
Thank you.
As is your knowledge about all of those issues, including rail cars.
It's recently acquired. Yeah.
I'm going to focus a little more narrowly on the slide that you showed about government support for natural gas and fracking. You know, it shows the impact that government policies and support can have on a technology. As you know, we are currently struggling with the Hill on clean energy support, including the solar investment tax credit and the wind production tax credit. And that slide, I think, is tells a really compelling story.
That's why I showed it, actually. It's an innovation story, not necessarily a gas story. Yes,
Absolutely.
yes, yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you all are using that story in your discussions with members of Congress to show that, look, here's the way government support can have a huge impact on U.S. industry in a very beneficial way for the U.S. economy. We did it for fossil fuels. Let's not throw clean energy under the bus.
Well, the one thing, my office had a clean energy innovation workshop. We're very concerned that VC in venture capital and clean energy has just fallen off the face of the earth. Okay, real problems, and your institutional investors aren't. They're scared off by it. So we're trying to figure out how to get more private investment into clean energy and how to provide more options from the government for investment in clean energy. And at that workshop, I did use that slide. And the problem is the space in the middle, the GRI funding. That funding was when we had a completely regulated gas industry. And it was a FERC-administered surcharge. GRI was a 501c3 organization, and it had guaranteed funding. It had sustained funding over time, which I think is what is so critical. And you don't even get that in regular programs at the Department of Energy because of the vicissitudes of appropriations, and the money gets mortgaged, and it becomes you end up very often having very little discretion at the end of the day, even when you have large amounts of money. And so that funding, where you got a lot of connection between the government and industry. GRI and the Department of Energy used to sit down and jointly do portfolios, and that GRI money was used to leverage a very small program at the Department of Energy. And that space, that connection between industry and the government is kind of missing. The formal structures don't exist, and I'm trying to figure out how to replicate that in the clean energy space. It's not an easy task, but when I leave here and go home tonight, I'm going to be writing a paper and a memo to try and figure out some of that. So I did use it to tell the story about several things. The role of the federal government, the importance of sustained investment over time, the relationship and the important relationship between the private sector and the public sector, those kinds of partnerships, how important that was. One other thing was the tax credit. There was a targeted tax credit. And so that's another piece of policy that we need to pay special attention to. And I'm working on it. So.
Nancy Hagel, NREL, the QTR, the technology piece, has a very large section on carbon capture and sequestration. Do you anticipate discussion, funding, moving that direction significantly? It's the largest part of the QTR, interestingly enough.
Well, I mean, there is an all-of-the-above energy strategy, and that's where you're going to you will have an impact in the United States with carbon capture and sequestration, although coal plants are shutting down because the price of gas is low. And so low gas prices have really hurt market share of coal, nuclear, and renewables, quite frankly. It's just, it's more economic, and so our demonstration programs for CCS are difficult, they're expensive. There's no price on carbon, so it has to be completely government-driven because we have no other policy that would enable the internalization of those costs. And so, but it could have a huge impact globally Whereas Marilyn asked the question, how can we help the rest of the world and with energy equity issues? One way, there's a lot of coal around the world, but you don't want them emitting carbon. And so low-cost carbon capture and sequestration could help us with some of the electrification issues and equity issues globally. We spend a lot of time on it. It's tough, but we think it's critical, and it's especially critical for the world. So I think I've gone over my time, way over. So. Anyone else? Great.
Right. Hi, Anne Marie Horowitz, Department of Energy. You mentioned you wanted to speak about the women piece of this as well. So
right.
Where are women in the workforce, and do they have the skills necessary for this?
Well, I mean, that's what, of course they have the skills necessary. And look at everyone here. There are incredible skills in the room. And, but that's what this event is about, and that's what these networks are about. And I find that the older I get, it's much more important to me to help younger women in their careers and careers in energy. And I don't like going into the room and being, I'm sure all of you experience it, being the only woman in the room. It's worse globally than it is in the U.S. It's a little better in regulated industries in the U.S. than it is in pure private. But I think that we should not lose sight of that. And I'm thrilled by this group and what it's become. So, okay, thank you very much. Thank you.